Hello and welcome. This is my Project4Plan, a sustainable solution for South African water scarcity. I'd like you to close your eyes for a minute and imagine that you're Nkosazana Koki. You're a South African woman, you're about 30 years old, and you're walking home from the field. You just finished the last day of harvest, and you begin to wonder about the future. You didn't collect enough food this year. That means that by this time next year, you'll be starving and your children will be starving. You don't even know if the child on your back will survive. You also didn't make enough to sell in order to collect enough money to make it through the year. As you walk home, these things overwhelm you. The struggle is real, and inside of you, this overwhelming sense of fear and doubt for the future takes hold. It's not just Nkosazana. It's a problem that many smallholder farmers in South Africa face on a daily basis. The problem is water scarcity. South Africa is one of the most water scarce nations in Africa. Water scarcity is when individuals don't have access to adequate amounts of water. And water scarcity leads to water security problems and food security problems. According to the UN Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 and in 2010, food and water security are basic human rights. Why are they still problems that we face today then? I define water scarcity as a means of the acceptable level of water for an individual at any given time, quantitatively and qualitatively. Food security means having available and adequate access to sufficient and nutritious food at any given time. These are big problems though. So what is at the root of water scarcity in South Africa? Well, I did research and found that 60% of water use in South Africa comes from agriculture. That means of the available water in South Africa, 60% of it is used for agricultural purposes. What makes up water use in agriculture? I break it into three parts: water access in agriculture, water transport in agriculture, and water use after agriculture, water quality after agriculture. Access means having water there. Is there actual water that can be used? Transport of water means transport from the access point to your farm, and then also from on the farm, so on site, to the plant, which is called irrigation. And then quality is after the water is used, herbicides and pesticides, are they in the water and are they flowing downstream and affecting other people? As I did more research and I dug more, I found that a variable, uncertain climate is the biggest proponent to water scarcity in South Africa. Because of the bad climate, they don't have access. So transportation for a large part can be ignored and quality can be ignored because they don't have enough water to begin with. But how can you solve climate as an issue? It's a problem, but you can't affect how much it rains every year. The thing that you can do is prepare the soil for poor rains. When going about tackling this problem, the appropriate solution I found, research supporting this, is that sustainable agricultural technologies are viable solutions for this problem. And a sustainable technology connotates something that takes into account conventional engineering but doesn't ignore, but rather focuses heavily on social, cultural, and economic considerations. Physically, it's normally sourced and made and repaired locally. So I reached this point where I determined that the problem was a bad climate, the solution was preparing the soil, but I wanted to take and talk to an actual South African farmer, an expert on this. And so I found John Hebblethwaite, and he told me basically the same thing that research had, that the problem was access because of a poor climate, and that the solution was conservation agriculture, which basically is all about preparing the soil to deal with a variable climate. So the final problem statement for Project 4 is that I will tackle the problem of soil erosion and how to improve water access in agriculture through the development of soil moisture retention on South African smallholder farms through the creation of a sustainable agricultural technology. And I'd like to talk about what that means. So my user for this project is a smallholder farmer. A smallholder farmer is someone who farms 10 hectares or less. In South Africa, 80% of these smallholders are women. They have very little purchasing power, making only about $1.3 a day per person. And they have a very low education rate. Most of them have only achieved around 5th grade at most. What are their needs? The main need is that they need to increase yields while not impacting water any more than it already is, because it's taxed quite heavily. And it also needs to build the soil as it goes. They need something that's cheap because they don't have a lot of money. They also need something that will build the soil and not hinder it. The solution has to be something viable for women, because 80% of smallholders in South Africa are women. And then it can't be too difficult or complicated to run because of low education rates. The possible solution that I'm considering for next semester is along the lines of conservation agriculture. And I mentioned this earlier, but conservation agriculture seeks to build and cultivate the soil and make it healthy so that when poor rains come, the soil makes the most of the little rain it gets, and the water is infiltrated into the soil and stored into the soil instead of washing away the top layer and inhibiting water absorption into the soil. What are the current problems with conservation agriculture? Conservation agriculture normally looks at planting a cover crop as well as relying on something called a no-till planter. As it is in South Africa, the Moldboard plow was brought over in the 1900s, early 1900s. And what it does is it cuts through the soil and turns the soil over, turning up the soil, and when rains do come, they carry away the top layer of soil, making water infiltration poor, and also they inhibit fertile soil growth. And so conservation agriculture plants a cover crop to improve soil and also relies on a no-till planter. But cover crops are expensive. It takes time to plant them. The no-till planters are very expensive. And what happens when your planter breaks? You're left with a large problem. So the direction that I will take is I will design a no-till planter as a sustainable planter for South Africa. I hope to make several iterations of this planter, testing different components and parts of perhaps current planters, trying to improve them and making them more viable for South African smallholders. Risks and assumptions. I will be working with people. That is a risky thing because people are important and valuable. I've picked somewhere where I'm not. It's a few thousand miles away, making that a huge risk for this project. There's a risk that I will let them down. I'll say partner with me, and then I won't provide what I had hoped to provide. And then it's a different culture than my own. That's a big risk, entering into a new place. I'm assuming several things as well, that the sustainable agricultural technology is the appropriate solution for this problem. I'm also assuming that if I make this no-till planter, that it won't be too different from their normative farming practice, that they will actually implement it. And then I'm also assuming that where my knowledge that I've found lacks, that my personal knowledge will make up for that. That's a large assumption on my behalf. There are several directions that I can turn to for help. I can turn to farming cooperatives, farming unions, South African government, as well as field experts here at Purdue, agricultural soil sciences and agricultural engineering. This is the plan for next semester, and I will make 3 prototypes, each of them testing specific ideas, and then I have built-in makeup time in each part of the plan. These are my references. Thank you for watching this and listening to me.